Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways. Attenzione, attenzione. Benvenuto.
Come stai?
Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. I don't know what that is in Italian, and I'm not going to bother trying. But
I know, obviously, because I've been doing Duolingo for 1,132 days.
You're fluent, of course.
I'm still absolutely rubbish.
Doesn't work on everyone.
I'm not like Alexander. I just don't have an ear for languages.
They don't promise it'll work on everyone, do they? Funny. Anyway, welcome to episode 4 of our series about the race for Rome, Monte Cassino, Anzio, the epic tale of a country basically put to the sword. It's the truth. I mean, one of the things, before we get going, and there's lots of story to crack through. But one of the things that strikes me about this is how fortunate France was that
to just have 4 years of occupation and nothing else.
Well, no, the fighty bit lasted for what? 6 weeks in the summer of 1940, and then 10 weeks in the summer of 1944. And yes, the occupation, obviously the occupation, yes, I mean, you're right, Jim. but you don't have two gigantic armies.
Try say that to Jean Moulin.
Well, yeah, but you don't have two gigantic armies crawling through every inch of the country, smashing it to pieces for 2 years.
I always think of it like a twister going across the kind of Midwest. You know, one of those twisters just sort of tearing everything that's in its wake.
Yeah, but I'm going to stick with that remark. How fortunate France was, because the fighting is the worst thing. The army showing up and deciding that feature is the one we need to hold, either hold at all costs or take at all costs. That's an extremely unfortunate thing to happen to a place, isn't it? And that's what we're talking about. It really is. Your first book about Italy's sorrow, about the war in Italy. I mean, that couldn't be a more aptly titled thing. France. And what I'm saying is, the French got off light. That's all.
Okay, and I've said it. I'm sticking with it. But I think in this episode, as we near the crux moments at Monte Cassino, and indeed at Anzio, it's worth beginning with our old friend Francis Tuca.
Yes. Commanding officer of 4th Indian Division. From a wide experience in attacks of mountain areas, I know that infantry cannot jump strong defences of this sort in the mountains. These defences have to be softened up, either by being cut off on all sides and starved out, or else by continuous and heavy bombardment over a period of days. Even with the latter preparation, success will only be achieved, in my opinion, if a thorough and prolonged air bombardment is undertaken with really heavy bombs, a good deal larger than kitty bomber missiles. The 1,000-pound bomb will be next to useless to effect this. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I am always right. Everyone else is always wrong.
Well, I tell you what, he's flipping right about all this.
He's got this one right, yeah.
He's got this one right. I'm afraid it's been, researching all this in some forensic detail has been frustrating and sobering in equal measure, I would say. Anyway, let's have a look at the German. Let's kick off.
Let's go look at the other side of the hill. So
let's have a look at the side of the hill. German situation.
Yeah.
So I think the thing you ended pretty much last episode when we were talking about the French on Belvedere, and we were talking about the Red Bulls and their first attack across the upper Rapido Valley and onto the kind of lower kind of knolls and hill features of the Monte Cassino Massif. And you were saying, actually, this is working, right? Lots of German troops going to Anzio, which is the whole point, drawing them away from putting the Germans in a blue funk, etc., etc. And the line along the Gustav line, after its repeated hammering, and one has to kind of, again, remember that the Red Bulls attack and the French attack on Belvedere and Abate is coming fast and furiously on top of 10 Corps attack on the Garigliano. 46 divisions attempt to get across. So they might not have got across, but they're still hammering the Germans on the other side with artillery pieces. They're still there. So the opposite side's got to be manned. Then the rapido crossings by the Texan division. Then you've got the rebels. Then you've got the French. So it's just absolutely, they're just hammering the German line. And the Germans are holding on at this point by the thinnest of threads. I mean, the 44th Hocken Deutschmeister Division is responsible for the whole of that Monte Cassino massive, from the Abbey all the way up to the Secca Valley, which is where it drops down from Monte Belvedere up into Monte Falco again on the other side. So they've got all of that, and they have just been hammered. And one has to remember that Jörg Zellner, who we've quoted a number of times, one of his battalion is a part of the 44th Hocken Deutschmeister Division, but isn't even there at this point. He's down on the southern Liri Valley at this stage. So they're spread about, the German, there's little penny packets all over the place. There's lots of firefighting going on. They're being absolutely decimated. And it's really interesting to think about this because, at the beginning of February, the 134th Regiment of the 44th Division has got 260 men, which is just 8% of what its full strength should be.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Okay, not 20%, not 25%, not 50%, 8%. Whole regiment, a whole brigade, 260 men. And then the 131st Regiment, which is also part of this, is down to 430 men. So that's 13%. So strongest...
They're doing fine then. They're doing fine.
Well, the strongest by miles is the 5th Gebirgsjäger Division, the Mountain Division, who are on the other side of the Secca Valley. So they are the ones holding Monte Falco to the north and up towards Atina. They are about 50%. So they're absolutely laughing, clearly. But I mean, 50% of any Allied unit. Bear in mind that the Texans on the Rapido are losing 24 men killed per battalion of the 6 battalions.
And regarding that as a disaster.
So the 90th Panzer Grenadier has been brought up to Cassino, but that's also in a really bad way. And now the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, which is predominantly over in the on the Adriatic, but never entirely. It has never once, since the Allies have invaded back in September 1943, it has never once operated as a complete division, ever. And General Heydrich, who is the commander of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, has repeatedly appealed to Kesselring to be allowed to move to southern France, back to southern France. They're based in southern France, to replenish and refit and sort things out. And he's told no. And as it stands already, most of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Regiment is at Anzio, Kampfgruppe Schulz, and now little small units piecemeal are being sent over from the Adriatic. But the whole of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division is about 3,400 men strong, something like that.
Right. And it should be
17,000. So that's 18% of strength.
I'm going to do my thing again, Jim, which a regular listener to this podcast will be familiar with. It's all right, they've lost. Germany, you have lost, right?
Yes, throw in the towel.
Yeah, the towel einchucken, bitte schön. I mean, if you're operating for units at 8% strength, you've lost. It's over. Or at least you can't win. You cannot win. What is victory now? What can it possibly be?
Right, what is the point of fighting south of Rome?
What's the point of any of it?
Go the Gothic line.
I mean, what's the point of any of it?
But okay, but compare that to the troops that are now at Anzio, because Hitler has said this abscess has to be thrown back into the sea. 96,000.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It makes no sense.
Well, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And are they not saying to him or saying to themselves, we can do that, but we've left our trousers down at Cassino, which isn't brilliant. It's very, very, it's a strange moment, this, isn't it? Because the Allied strategy has worked, yet they don't seem to be able to capitalise on it.
Which is the really frustrating thing. So on the 1st of February, the 44th Division has 800 men, and it should be 15,000.
And that's it on Monte Cassino.
That is it.
Okay, Jim. So if you're ultra and you're reading the decrypts about German deployments in this part of Italy, you're going, there's a whole division up there. Is that what you're doing, or are you saying?
Yeah. You have no idea that there's this depleted.
Right. Okay. So that's part of the problem here, is it? Is that part of the problem for the Allies, as well as it being an eminently defendable country and all that? And the Germans are all in, because after all, we in previous episodes we've read diaries of people saying, it's all pointless, but I'm going to carry on anyway. I've got to do this for my family. Germany's being bombed at home. So, what else am I going to do? You know what I mean? They're not saying this is pointless. I won't go on. I can't go on. I won't go on. It's Alexander going, oh, bloody hell, there's a whole division on the top of Monte Cassino.
Yes, they are. They are thinking that, but they're not. They know they're not kind of full strength, but they also know that it's a division and they think it's quite strong. I mean, there is a kind of we're talking about a very, very short period of time here. From the 1st of February to the 22nd of January is 8 days or whatever. 9 days. I mean, it's nothing. We've had a month of fighting in 1944, and there is this. We've got to keep going. We've got to keep going. We've got to pass it because of Overlord, and we've got to keep hammering away at it. So, what that is not encouraging is any sense of pause, reflection. It's just we've got to keep hammering, and that's fine. But what's happened is because the Red Bulls, the CEF, the French attack on Belvedere is a kind of afterthought. It's not an afterthought, but it's kind of continuing the pressure. But it's a secondary attack to the main event, which is the Red Bulls. The Red Bulls are going up to the casino feature because they've got to turn the town and get into the Liri Valley, and they've got to get Highway 6. And that's the shortest geographical way of doing that. And then you've got to clear the massive, this spur with the Abbey on the end of it, which is clearly the kind of the bit that's overlooking the valley. So let's get rid of that. But what they need to be thinking is, my God, the French have got to Belvedere. This is a much easier place to exploit. The problem is the people up there who can see that this is easy to exploit are not filtering that information down to someone like Doc Ryder, who is the commander of the Red Bulls, or even Jeffrey Keyes, who is the 2 Corps commander. That is not reaching Alexander and Clark. I mean, they're just Anzio at the moment. There's no material danger to Fifth Army at Cassino, but there is huge danger to Sixth Corps if they cock it up.
Yeah.
So that's where their focus is for obvious reasons.
Yeah. And it looks like they are cocking it up too because of the inertia.
Right. So they're worried about Lucas. They're worried about the inertia.
Yeah. At the end of the last episode, it was all about that. It was him being told to get his finger out repeatedly and him saying, I can't bear the pressure. So little wonder they're looking in the other direction then.
Exactly that. And there is no question that the golden opportunity that is there is the line that 142nd Infantry Regiment, that middle battalion of that middle regiment of the Texans, which is on the southern flank of the French and the northern flank of the Red Bulls, going towards this mountain village of Torelle. That is the golden opportunity. But because the massif is triangular, the further you go north, the wider the massif is. So the greater the distance you've got to go across the mountains. And everyone's just thinking, whoa, that feels like a lot of mules. That feels like a lot of this. But it's actually, once you get onto that high ground up there, the going is much, much easier. Because although there's lots of little folds in the ground, there aren't narrow ridges. And the problem with narrow ridges is there is a limit to how many men you can put forward along there. Whereas on a wide open space, you can attack on a broad front. So what they should have done is redirected the Red Bulls up onto that spot there and brought in another division if they possibly could and just gone, bam, this is where we need to go. But they don't for all those reasons. And again, it's kind of easy to be wise after the event. But what happens is the Red Bulls offensive is renewed on the 1st of February. The 133rd Regiment pushed down from the north down into the town, the northern edge of Cassino town. And the 135th Regiment managed to get up onto the Colle Maiola, which then leads onto this long, narrow ridge, this sort of slug-like ridge, which has its end position in point 593, which is a rocky knoll, which has a sharp kind of sort of cliff face on the far side of it, on the southern side of it, which then drops down onto a kind of sort of little track below, sort of, 200 foot below, something like that. And then it drops down into the valley. Running parallel to that is Monte Castellone, which is much higher, and from that runs 2 other further ridges, little slug-like ridges. There's a Colle Sant'Angelo and what becomes known as the Phantom Ridge. And the Red Bulls get up onto those 2 twin ridges, so they're moving southwards across the width of the Monte Cassino spur. And repeatedly they hammer the point 593, and they don't manage to take it. And the reason they don't take it is because up there now are the first units of the Fallschirmjäger division, and this is from the 4th Regiment, it's the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Regiment, which is only 236 men and 4 officers, and it's commanded by a chap called Major Rudolf Kratzert. And Kratzert is 42 at this time. He's quite an old man in the big scheme of things, but he's one of these absolute veteran characters down through which filters an ethos, a style of command, an aggressiveness, a kind of confidence in your superior's experience, all that kind of stuff. So new guys are coming in and they're much better able to be absorbed, even though their training, and even in the Fallschirmjäger, is kind of insufficient by this stage. And these guys are, we talk about bristling with weaponry. They have double the number of machine guns that other units have, and they're just very good at thinking on their feet and working on, and working on what they need to do. And defenses have been prepared up here. And what you have at this knoll of 0.593, so you've got this ridge, which the Americans christened Snake's Head Ridge, goes along this it's quite a narrow area that you're talking about. When it culminates at the peak, which is 0.593, and it drops down underneath that rocky outcrop are caves.
Yeah.
And down below 200 feet below are even more caves which have been blasted out of the mountainside. And the German troops there are completely impervious. So what you do is during daylight, you put men up in that forward position. You've got wire entanglements and mines, and you have pickets and stuff with machine guns. And if they get lost, they get lost. But what you then do at night, you then come up again, you creep up from the side, lob over some grenades, push the Americans back or whatever, and hold it again. And the Americans have this opportunity in the first days of February to take the whole piece, because Kratzert's men don't arrive until the night of the 4th of February.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the 90th Panzer Grenadier Division, which again is massively depleted, but which is commanded by Hans-Günther Bader, is a character that we've come across many times from North Africa and Sicily and all the rest of it. He's like super, super competent. He's one of the really, really good commanders. He takes over there, and they're just starting to take over in these first days of February from the 44th Division, who are just told to go and hang and hold on to Torelle and around Monte Abate and all that area, and the northern part of this feature. So there is this golden opportunity, and they're so close to winning. And the point is the American leadership thinks they're close to winning because they can see the Via Casalina. They can see the Liri Valley from up there. From 0.593, it's literally, you can reach your hand out and grab it. And it seems so close. And it seems impossible that with one more push, they can't just sort of prevail.
And yet,
but
there's a great big fat meanwhile, though, isn't there?
There's a very big fat meanwhile,
which we touched on earlier, which is the Allied focus is on Anzio, actually.
Well, the high leader, the high commander is definitely.
Yeah. And it's the focus of the grand strategist himself, Adolf Hitler, who says the battle must be hard and merciless, not only against the enemy, but against all officers and units who fail in this decisive hour.
I mean, imagine getting that.
I mean, God help, you'd think, oh, great. Oh, brilliant. Oh, brilliant. We've all got to die, have we? Oh, great.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, fantastic.
I mean, and
oh, thanks very much, Adolf.
I mean, it's got nothing in it, it's got nothing in it, that statement, really, has it? Apart from
you've got to die.
Keep fighting and carry on, isn't it? Right? It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
But there are now 95,000 soldiers, German soldiers at Anzio. I mean...
Yeah. Of which 59,000 are combat troops. They're fighting troops.
There were 800.
Yeah.
On day one.
Yeah, and you have to kind of tip your cap to that one. I mean, that is impressive. That what can be done when you don't have command of the skies, and where all travel is done by night and all this kind of stuff, or only when it's pouring with rain. I mean, it is impressive that they've got that many men there in that time, and that is because, again, the Hitlerian spotlight is absolutely on it. But General Eberhard von Mackensen, who's been sitting up in command of AOK 14, the Army Oberkommando 14, so the 14th Army, up in the north and having a jolly nice time, kind of hanging around Venice and Verona, is deeply unimpressed by this. Thinks it's a terrible idea, and he's very much in the he's a Romalist. He thinks they should have fallen behind the Pisa Rimini line and held the kind of northern redoubt, and he thinks this is a terrible idea. But
what's peculiar here is he's sort of him and Lucas kind of are in a negative image of each other, aren't they? In a weird way. Yeah, because Mackinson's thinking, well, I haven't really got the numbers to do this, to push him into the sea. And Lucas is thinking, well, I'm not really ready to move on. So it's as if they're both temperamentally or in terms of their decision making, set on a stalemate. It's very peculiar, isn't it? That they occupy this sort of they reflect one another in their attitude. So Mackinson thinks, well, all right, we'll tidy up the lines rather than smash the whole thing, because he doesn't think, he wants a 3-in-1 advantage. He hasn't got it. Doesn't think he's got it. And as you say, Jim, he thinks the whole thing. I mean, it's very interesting. Lucas is all like, I don't know if this is going to work in his diary, isn't he? This is a bad idea. Who would want to be a general? And Mackeson's kind of, he thinks the same, doesn't he? And, he just
thinks the war's lost. He hates Hitler. He's an old Prussian aristocrat. He's the fourth of 5 sons of Field Marshal von Mackensen, him of twirly moustaches. And, he's just, and he thinks Kesselring's a kind of sort of ghastly kind of sort of parvenu. And
well, I mean, he is. He's from the Air Force.
Well, he is.
Oh boy.
So he just thinks he's just he's actually quite a good foil to Kesselring in one way. But the truth is he hasn't got a 3-to-1 advantage by any stretch of the imagination, which is a sort of normal kind of attacking rule of thumb. But he's originally going to get started on the 1st of February, but then heavy Allied bombing raids hit their supply dumps on the 1st and 2nd, and so he doesn't get going until the evening of the 3rd of February. And the idea of this counterattack is really to focus on that salient, that British salient that has gone up to Campiglione. And what they do is they attack from both sides. And the British 1st Division have basically just got infantry up there. They've got infantry battalions. They've got the 3rd Battalion and the brigade rather, and the 24th Guards. And so you've got Scots Guards, Irish Guards on one side, Grenadier Guards and kind of reserve at the base. Then at the top, you've got the show of Foresters, Duke of Wellingtons. You've got Duke of Wellingtons, show of Foresters, and then the 6th Gordons. And then I think you've got, is it the Loyals? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is you've got 6 battalions in this, covering this finger. So the Irish Guards are facing westwards on the finger, and at their backs are the 6th Gordons facing eastwards around this finger, either side of the Via Anzati. And within this, you've got a railway line crossing them. You've also got a rail line running parallel to the road of the Via Ranzati. You've also got Aprilia, the factory, on one side. And you've also got the base of a kind of crossroads. You've got a place called Caracetto, which is kind of a non-little town, really. No, it's not a town. It's like a cluster of buildings. And what happens is they attack with 2 battle groups, which are based around KG Pfeiffer. Kampfgruppe Pfeiffer is based around the 65th Infantry Division, which you may remember was completely annihilated over the Sangro at the back end of November 1943 by 8th Army on the Adriatic coast. Miraculously, Phoenix-like kind of risen again. And then Kampfgruppe Grazer, which has got that's got the tanks and the Stugs and the Panzer IVs and units of the 750th Infantry, 15th Infantry Division, who've come from the south of France. And these guys have only just arrived, don't forget, so they don't know the ground or anything. The ground is very soggy, very boggy, so you do really need your axis advance of these roads. And it's an absolute hammer for the British battalions. They get overrun. They lose kind of 50% of their number in very quick order. It takes several days. And there's a kind of initial assault from the kind of sort of 3rd, 4th, 5th. Then there's a pause, and then von Mackensen renews his assault again on the 7th of February, and the salient is completely reduced. I mean, this is a very, very quick kind of rundown. One of the problems is that the Gordons get stuffed because half of the Gordons just surrender. They get slightly overrun, and instead of, they just throw in the towel. Panic grips them in this northern companies on their line, and that undermines the position. But the real problem with this is that General Penny, Ronald Penny, who is the commander of the 1st British Division, repeatedly asks for fire support.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get it.
Why not?
He gets a few tanks from the 46th RTR, but it is really just a few, because Lucas doesn't send them.
Why not?
Because he's waiting for the big counterattack, and this isn't it.
Really? So
this is a little counterattack. So he thinks, I need to hold my armour. He never wants to because he's so cautious now and he's so besieged that he's not using the armour that he should be using when he wants to use it. I mean, the interesting thing is that had the Allies walloped this counterattack, there wouldn't have been further counterattacks, I don't think.
Because the Germans would have realised it ain't worth it.
Yeah, and if they had, it would have been badly organised, badly planned, and it wouldn't have had half the success that it does. I mean, as it turns out, it isn't successful ultimately, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But, there's nothing like meeting force with a really, really strong show of force.
Yeah.
And all they're
exactly.
meeting is infantry battalions. And infantry battalions can't operate against excessive amounts of armour. and anti-tank guns.
Yeah, they can't. And I mean, I suppose the thing that Lucas does have is naval gun power if he needs it.
Yes, but even they're being a bit sticky. They're being a bit kind of, it's kind of when it suits them. I mean, there's not a good relationship between Admiral John Cunningham and Lucas either.
Right.
So that's not helping. And what you've got on the other side of the so if you imagine that the road from Anzio goes straight north, the Germans are attacking either side of this road from the north. On the one side, you've got the flat plain, the Anzio plain. On the other side, you're just starting to get into this kind of weird, sort of slightly lumpy countryside, which is, first of all, you've got the Bon Reposo Ridge, which is this like sort of rolling kind of ridge line which extends in a western direction, and then beneath that you've got the veins on a leaf, which are the wadis, as they become known as, these narrow little gullies, and which have been scored by rivers and streams, but which are narrow and steep and look like trenches. And immediately underneath the Buon Reposo Ridge, you've got these series of caves, which are quarries, which were dug out by the Romans back in the day, and they're absolutely huge. There's 3 miles of passageways and caves, which were limestone quarries from Roman times, and they are underneath the southern side of the Buon Reposo Ridge. And what happens on the renewed attack on the 8th of February is that it's pouring with rain. It's absolutely miserable. And the Kampfgruppe Pfeiffer, which is a sort of combination of Fallschirmjäger and the 65th Infantry Division, overrun the North Staffs, for example. And 2 companies just get completely overrun and put in the bag or killed or whatever. The third one is infiltrated. 5th Grenadier Guards is then flung into the fray. And one of the people that's taken prisoner there is Lieutenant Paul Freyberg.
Oh.
Who was Freyberg's son.
Right. Wow. That's interesting.
So again, Penny is going, please send me some armor. Please send me some armor. So Lucas sends him up 7 Stuarts.
I the more I hear about this Lucas guy, the less I like him. It's very. Do you think if the salient had contained American soldiers, his attitude might have been different?
Well, I don't know. He's just not on it, and he doesn't visit the front, and he doesn't go up to see Penny, and he does send the 3rd Battalion of the 504th PIR, who make a huge difference because they're kind of sort of gung ho and tough and all the rest of it. By this stage, the London Irish are attacking, are holding the factory. The London Irish have been on the Gariano front, so this is part of the transition of 56th Division from 10 Corps, from the Gariano front to the. Now that is sort of gone on to defensive. They've been transported to Anzio, and the rest of 56th Division is following, and they basically arrive and get flung straight into it, and they're holding the factory, and they're just overwhelmed. And on the morning of the 10th, Lucas finally turns up and says, "Okay, what's going on?" And says, "Right, well, tomorrow we'll counterattack with the 45th Thunderbirds," and then he buggers off again. And the 157th Infantry from the 45th Thunderbirds do attack the following morning, again with insufficient fire support, and they get absolutely nowhere at all. And that's the end of that one. And then there's, then it's kind of sort of peace. So the Battle of the Thumb, there's this salient that goes up to Campiglione Station, is over by the 11th of February.
But it boils down to, if you let the Germans in, they're harder to get out, aren't they? So don't let them in the first place. You meet force with force.
The failure is you've got the salient. You don't sit with the salient. You expand the salient so that it's consistent, and then you take Cisterna and all the rest of it. But on the 30th, that instead of, the best way to put off an enemy counterattack is to attack first yourself. And there's no thrust. There's no a major armor thrust would have made a huge difference, and they just don't do it.
Well, and actually, as ever, what the Germans do when they attack this vigorously is they do offer you an opportunity to defeat them. Because they don't, if they're in defence, you have to figure out what to do about them. But if they attack you, well, then, like you say, you reply with armour, you deal with it. That's the end of that. But now they're in the factory and they've got to be removed, and that all just gets much, much more difficult immediately. I
mean, it is interesting though, because Clark absolutely puts his finger on the punny. He says, Lucas doesn't go into details. I urged him to designate Harmon, who is Ernest Harmon is the commander of the 1st Armoured Division, as his tank destroyer and tank officer to coordinate the whole defence. He apparently has no mobile tank destroyer unit to rush from place to place as the situation requires it. And so, why not? He's got all this armour. He's got 500 tracked vehicles. He's got not only has he got 380 tanks, he's also got 200 tank destroyers.
Yeah. So what are they for?
Right. Well, therefore, the moment where the
tanks.
Germans do their all-out counterattack, which he knows is coming. He knows this isn't it. And all his men are building these kind of, he's got all his men to kind of, prepare these defence lines.
So he's prepared to squander these infantry battalions in the process, which is kind of crazy, really. Right. So meanwhile, the New Zealand
very
Corps
quickly before we finish this half.
Yeah. The New Zealand Corps is formed at the beginning of February by Alex, and who sends them then to Cassino as part of Fifth Army. Francis Tucker, who we started the episode with, gets there and heads immediately to the front. Is he sick at this point, or is he getting ill? Or
no, he's absolutely fine at this point. He's absolutely fine. Okay, fine. This is very end of January, beginning of February. It's just like the 30th of January, 31st, 1st of February.
Yeah, and Tucker
has a good scout.
Has a good look the way he does.
And Juan says the weak point is up around Torelle and around Monte Carlo. That is the weak point of the German line. That's where we need to be going. And Tucker goes 100%. I'm totally with this.
But the issue here is that Freiburg, the hero,
has already been a corps commander.
Has already been a corps commander and is in charge of this New Zealand corps. And I mean, this is what's very interesting is the politics at play here. And the Kiwis have been in the Mediterranean for a long, long time as well. So it is interesting that they feel that they should resort to them again now. And there's the drama at home in the form of the furlough mutiny in New Zealand, which I think is an interesting backstory, which we won't talk about because there isn't time.
But Alexander could have sent 13 corps. He could have sent 13 corps. He could have created an Indian Army Corps out of 8th Indian Army and out of 8th Indian Division and 4th Indian Division, and he could have put Tucker as the corps commander. He doesn't because of his divisional commanders. He wants to keep 13 Corps with its cohesion on the Adriatic coast, and he wants to keep a reserve. And he also, Freiburg has been a corps commander before because there's been a New Zealand corps in the beginning of 1943 in Tunisia, and obviously he's had a corps in Crete before. And Freiburg has a reputation, which is fearlessness and all the rest of it. But it's unquestionably an error because Freiburg mentally is not up to it. And one of the problems is because it's made in a hurry, there isn't time to create a core staff. So the core staff becomes a New Zealand division staff. Or rather, the New Zealand division staff becomes the core staff is probably a better way of putting it. But, there is no question about it that von Sanger is so worried about the weakness of the situation on the Monte Cassino Massif that at this point he formally says to Kesselring, I think we need to pull back. And that's obviously in light of Hitler's comment on the 28th of January about being ruthless and sticking at it and all the rest of it. This is quite a risky thing to do, but he does.
Yeah, but it's consensus opinion. Everyone but Kesselring and Hitler basically thinks that we should knock this on the head.
But the other thing is at the same time, Cassino is turning into a much tougher nut because, and for this, the Allies have General Bader to thank because he has worked out, it's Bader who has got his new headquarters at Roccaseca, which is just on the Via Casalina on the other side, on the southern side of the Cassino Massif. He has worked out how to do this defensive system. And basically what you've got these series of these slug-like ridges, these two slug-like ridges going across the massif. You've got the one extending from Monte Castellone to the north, which then goes into the Colle Sant'Angelo and then the Phantom Ridge, which drops down to this little mountain plain called Albanetta, which then drops down into this very, very narrow gorge called Death Gully, which runs down to the Via Casalina down in the valley below. Then it rises up again, which is Snake's Head Ridge, which culminates in 0.593. Then it drops down again to the Colle d'Onofrio, which is this little saddle. There's a shallow ridge running up to Monastery Hill, on which the Abbey is perched again. So if you think about it, it's sort of it's like this, and it's going up like that. Think of it as a kind of, I don't know, a bit like a W.
I was just going to say a W, like a W.
A bit like a W, but a sort of roundy W. And what Bader recognised is that the key to holding the whole position is 0.593, because although it's not the highest point, it's this rocky spur which has an end. Other ridges sort of roll down gently, but this has this drop at the end of this spur. So he devises the network as a figure of 8. So the apex of the figure of 8, of these two circles of the figure of 8, is 0.593. And the southern one extends down the slopes along the back around Monastery Hill and the Abbey, along Colle D'Onofrio, and then back up onto Snake's Head Ridge again. And the northern one drops down into the kind of Albanetta Plateau, up Phantom Ridge, onto the kind of southern edge of Castelloni, along Colle Sant'Angelo and back round again, down into the Death Gully and back up again. And so you've got these, they're not perfect circles, but they're kind of rough circles. And all around these circles are mortar pits and machine guns and increasing numbers of machine guns. And what that means is for you to be able to control and permanently control 0.593, you've got to overwhelm more than 50% of both of the circles at the same time. Because otherwise you've got enfilading fire, which for those who don't know what that means you've got fire cutting across you from both sides. And so you can take 0.593, but you can't hold it because you're going to be absolutely pummeled from fire coming from either side, from the hill, from Monastery Hill, from Colle Sant'Angelo on Phantom Ridge on one side, the Colle D'Onofrio and the Monastery Hill from the other side. They'll be pouring fire into you from either side, plus mortars. And you've got these hidden bunkers underneath the lip of the very far edge of 0.593, which the Americans don't know about, which means it's impossible to take it and hold it unless you have overwhelmed these both other sides at the same time.
So after the break, we will outline what Francis Tucker thinks should be done, and then what happens. because as implied at the start of this episode, there is a gap between the intention and the act. We will see you in a moment. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk, where we're just about to find out what Francis Tucker thinks should be done, and then many a slip twixt cup and lip in the story of the Battle for Monte Cassino is the simple truth. After all, one of the interesting things about Francis Tucker is his 4th Indian Division have trained as mountain soldiers, aren't they? This is his speciality, in fact. It's his thing. And also, Tucker's other real obsession, bugbear, is that things must never be static, that war is about motion and movement, and that the minute things stop, you've got to think of how to get them moving again, and that mobility is war.
Yes, and what he realizes is that the ridge down which the Red Bulls are attacking, Snake's Head Ridge, and concurrently along Phantom Ridge and the Colle Sant'Angelo, on really narrow ridges where there's no room for maneuver. So the most you can put down at one time is a company. So what you're doing is you've effectively got a meat grinder, because they're going down on a little conveyor belt. They're hitting the kind of chewing up machine, and then the next one's coming, and the next one's coming, and the next one's coming. And you can have all the men in the world, but you can only ever put in a certain very small number at one time along those ridge lines because of the narrowness of the ridge and your inability to maneuver. And what you have to understand is that on top of this ridge at this point, there's no trees whatsoever. There's sort of rough ankle high vegetation. This is all rocks and stones, which are being made more and more rocky with the more artillery fire that's coming in. There's no soil it's worth speaking about. It is a very, very difficult place in which to move forward. And it's a very easy place in which to stick behind a Sanger and fire machine gun and mortars. And he also realizes that the approaches to Cassino Town are very, very problematic because of the waterlogged area. You're very exposed in your advance across the Upper Rapido Valley. There's no shortcut of that. You have to get across the Upper Rapido Valley. Whereas further south into the Lira Valley, you've got Monte Trocchio, which is running parallel to the River Rapido as it heads south. So sort of effectively like a blocking rock in front of the Liri Valley, behind which you can build up huge amounts of forces. So your advance to the river is not very, very big at that point. So it's much easier to build up forces there than it is in the Upper Rapido Valley around Cassino. So he's saying, don't bother with that. He said, the problem with the Rapido thing is not that it happened; it was the execution of the plan. It wasn't the plan. It wasn't that the concept was a problem. So he said, my suggestion is you attack with the New Zealand division there, but with a proper fire plan, and make sure that you bring all your assets to bear and do it properly. And don't forget, this is a kind of few weeks on and the Germans are weakened. And at the same time, you forget about the Monte Cassino just isolate it and go across north of Monte Castelloni and south of Monte Cairo. That's the way to go. And Freyberg, who is a total kind of, He
agrees with the last person he spoke to.
He agrees with the last person he speaks to.
He's one of those people.
And he goes, yeah, that's a great plan. And Tuka knows that as long as he's holding his hand, it'll be fine. because he'll be able to force it through. Because the problem is the moment Freyberg gets into a conference with people who have a counter view, he doesn't have the answers, whereas Tuchel does.
But
then Tuchel gets ill, and he gets struck down by a recurring disease he's got, which is rheumatoid arthritis. And
yes,
suddenly,
and
this is a terrible, and you don't know when you're going to be gripped by this particular surge of the problem, and it affects your joints, and it's unbelievably painful, and you can barely move. And he has to go to, he insists on seeing Freyberg on the 3rd of February, but has to succumb to hospital on the 4th. And when he goes down, he says to Freyberg, whatever you do, get someone decent in to take over. You should get kind of General Pasha Tom Russell, who's a commander of the 8th Indian Division. Get him across from the Adriatic. Someone else can hold there. You need someone proper to do this. But he doesn't. He chooses Harry Dimmerlin, who's a brigadier, who's a TA artilleryman, and has done a very perfectly adequate job as artillery commander for the 4th Indian Division, but hasn't served in India, isn't an infantry commander, and doesn't have the force of character to do this job at the most important time that they're about to go into action. It is a breathtakingly odd decision.
But 4th Indian Division is Tuker's division. He takes it over from Frank Messervy, who's a Burma figure that we have talked about in the past. He takes over from him, and he trains the division up, even though they're spread all across the Middle East, in Palestine, all over the place. It's his division. So anyone taking over has got big boots to fill, and you need the right guy. I mean, maybe Freyberg thinks, well, Dimmerlin's a lot less trouble. He's not going to be arguing with me. He's not going to be in my ear about how we ought to do this properly.
I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking. But also, there's infantry brigade commanders who are disciples of Tuker and cut from the Tuker cloth. People like Donald Bateman and Lovett, who are absolutely in Tuker's mould, and would have been far better a choice because they're infantrymen. But anyway, he doesn't, and be that as it may, that's what happens. And he then Freyberg has a conference with Clark and with Keyes, who is the 2 Corps commander, on the 4th of February. And Keyes is exhausted because he's overseen the Rapido and he's overseen the Red Bulls in the last 2 weeks, and he's knackered and fed up. And Freyberg comes in and goes, well, what we need to do is, there's no point going into Cassino where his Keyes' Red Bulls already are. What you want to do is across here at Sant'Angelo. And Keyes just loses the plot and goes, are you mad? That's exactly where the Texans got across, and it failed completely. And, my dead boys are still out there. I mean, what the heck? And Freyberg doesn't have the answers because he's not Tuker. And so that's kicked into the long grass. Meanwhile, the Red Bulls are attacking along Snake's Head Ridge, and they're getting absolutely nowhere. And eventually the 141st Infantry, the Texans, who have been slaughtered on the Rapido but now kind of got replacements, they come up as well. They then get slaughtered. I mean, it is, you're just hammering over. And the Red Bull artillery fires something like 110,000 rounds in this period, and they don't get anywhere. And every single day, more troops, 90th Panzer Grenadier Division troops, more Fallschirmjäger troops are arriving and filling in the slots around the figure of 8. And the job is getting harder, not easier. But what they're looking at is sort of figures on the map and going, well, we're so close to the Liri Valley, one more push, and we'll do it. And the problem is that the real nature of the fighting up on the ridges is not filtering down because so many of the officers are getting killed. So it's not filtering down to the higher commanders. And the only person who seems to be able to see that this is a really, really crazy idea is Tuker. And Tuker's brigade commanders, people like Bateman and Lovett, who are all just going, this is insane. But the plan is, by the 8th of February, is to give it one last push. And this is signed off by Alexander and Clark, because they've got their eyes on Anzio and they haven't been up to the top of the Casino Massif. And all they can see, again, is the map of the arrows and think well, we're nearly there. But they're not. That
Tuker gets sick at this point is sort of, I mean, is it
a terrible tragedy?
It's a terrible tragedy. And he gets out of hospital. I mean, this is a favourite detail of mine about him. He realises that no one knows how the Abbey was built. He doesn't know that the people have no idea of its construction. So he sends a subaltern off to find a book, go to the bookshops of Naples and find an architecture book about how the Abbey's been constructed. No one's bothered. And it's absolutely incredible. And succeeds in finding a book. And they realise, and that's why he's saying you can't do this with ground attack aircraft.
Yes.
This needs to be a strategic bombing effort in effect.
But what has happened on the 12th? Tuca, in his hospital bed in Caserta, learns that his plan for crossing the Rapido, and particularly for going north of Monte Castelloni, south of Cairo, where it's much more open countryside, there's less of these narrow ridges. The open countryside gives you much more room for maneuver for your troops, and where the enemy is less well dug in and the troops are of lower quality. He learns that Freiburg has abandoned that suggestion and instead is renewing the assault on the Monte Cassino Massif. Tuca's ability to influence this is now very limited. So he says, okay, if this is your plan, I think it's a massive mistake. But if you are absolutely insistent on battering your head against the Monte Cassino Massif, there is only one way this can be done. And this is by overwhelming bombardment of the entire massif, which I'm afraid means destroying the Abbey and destroying everything. And he actually gets out of bed. Although he's in agony, he gets out of bed. He sends missives to Freiburg, and he goes and sees him in person. And he says to him, he points him on the chest and says, you have to listen to this. This has to be overwhelming, sustained bombing for several days. It needs high-capacity bombs. It needs blockbusters. It needs 2,500-pound bombs and 4,000-pound bombs. And he says, kitty bombers with kind of 1,000-pounders and 500-pounders aren't going to cut it. This is a job for the strategic air forces, and a 1,000-pound bomb is not going to do it. And he writes later, he says, I did see Freiburg and at least twice thumped into him that there must be no compromise in the air, etc., bombardment, all or nothing, and no direct attack. And what he says is the attack, though, when it does come, has to follow immediately afterwards. And that is the only way this will work.
Yeah.
That evening, Freiburg goes to see Clark and he says, I desire that I be given air support tomorrow in order to soften up the enemy positions in the casino area. I want 3 missions of 12 planes each, the planes to be kitty bombers carrying 1,000-pound bombs. It is incomprehensible how he could have got this so wrong. So he has asked for exactly what Tuca said don't ask for.
Yeah.
Tuca goes, no kitty bombers, 1,000-pound bombs are going to be useless. Freiburg goes to Clark and goes, what I want is kitty bombers and 1,000 pounds. It's absolutely amazing. Anyway, meanwhile, the combination of the Texans and the Red Bulls on Castelloni and on particularly on Snake's Head Ridge doesn't work. The 168 infantry they do an attack across the Colle d'Onofrio. They get slaughtered. They don't get anywhere. They get within 400 yards of the Abbey, but no further. There's huge problems of changing over the troops, 4th Indian Division up onto the Monte Cassino Massif, because there's basically one little track up through the mountains. It requires mules. They've got different equipment to the Americans. It takes a huge amount of time. You can only do it at night. And the Americans are so exhausted that a whole load of the survivors have to be stretchered off, which takes up mule space and time and all the rest of it. So the changeover is really, really slow. And meanwhile, Clark has said has learned about this bombing attack on the 12th, doesn't like it at all, goes to Alexander and says, I think this is a massive mistake. You don't need to destroy the Abbey. And you certainly don't need to destroy the Abbey for Freiburg's plan. As it stands, you don't. So Clark is not incorrect about that. Alexander goes, well, I feel that, if we're sending men in to kind of save their, to potentially risk their lives, and the commanding officer of that operation demands this, I feel honor bound to kind of support it. So it gets permission all the way up to the very top to support the bombing of the Abbey.
But even then, Freiburg doesn't get what he asks for, does he?
No, he don't. Well, he doesn't get kitty bombers. No, he gets a much bigger effort than that, because Ira Aker has taken a plane over and looked at it and said, okay, we need the heavy bombers. But equally, they also know that there's going to be a counterattack in Anzio, and the air forces are going to be needed for that. And they also know that they need good weather. So they decide that they're going to do this on the 15th. Freiburg learns on the afternoon of the 14th that this is going to happen the following morning, but doesn't tell his attacking brigadiers. So the following morning, Dimmeline and Lovett and Bateman and co are all having a conference about the forthcoming attack. And the first thing, and they suddenly see the bombers coming over to bomb the Abbey. They don't know anything about it. So the idea of coordinating this isn't going to happen. So the Abbey, they come over, completely destroy the Abbey, but don't destroy it properly. It's just very badly hammered. They don't bother hitting any other targets. It is just the Abbey that they're targeting because, again, it's been lost in translation. What Tuca says is destroy the whole massif. With a sustained bombardment using high-capacity bombs, what does happen is they destroy the Abbey, with low-capacity bombs. And that night, the Sussex Battalion, which is part of the 7th Indian Infantry Brigade, have to clear 0.593 because they can't do the attack until they've cleared 0.593, and they've got up there thinking it was in American hands but discovering it isn't. They go and do it and have exactly the same result as the Americans. They get repulsed. So then they have to renew it again the following night. So they do it the following night. Again, they get repulsed. So then they think, well, okay, well, let's do a coordinated attack with 3 battalions. The Sussex have been decimated. So now they put in the Rajputana Rifles, which is one of the finest battalions in the whole 4th Infantry Division, alongside 2 Gurkha battalions on either side of them. And they get destroyed too. And, it just doesn't work. And it never was going to work. And Dimelin doesn't have the authority or gumption or force of character to be able to go, this is a waste of time, it's not going to work. Freyberg has absolutely no grip on the picture whatsoever, and it's a complete disaster. And what they don't understand is it's not about the state of the Red Bull's exhaustion that's the problem. It's the nature of the terrain and the nature of the German defences on Cassino, which is preventing it. And the bottom line is the Fallschirmjäger can be very short in number. They can only be a matter of a few hundreds, but it only takes 2 men to man a machine gun. It only takes 3 men to man some mortars. And if you've got double the number of those and you've got lots of infantry bringing up ammunition and hurling grenades, that's all you need.
Well, and they can see you coming is the other thing.
And they can see you coming. And they're in defensive positions and you're not, because there is no cover up there. There's cover like a big boulder that you can hide behind. But the moment that you want to advance, you've got to get up from behind that cover. And of course, because there's no soil, the explosive effect of mortars and artillery and literally everything is trebled because there's splinters of rock going everywhere as well. It is absolutely possible. And what is amazing is that no one gets this. That they just, the only person who seems to understand, the only people that seem to understand it are the brigadiers and senior commanders of the 4th Indian Division and Tuka himself.
And in a strange way, on the reverse, Kesselring, whose attitude is the thing that's causing the Allies such problems. That you dig these guys in, you don't give ground, and so that there's in the way that Mackerson and Lucas reflect each other in Anzio. So here, Freyberg and Kesselring are in opposition here too, aren't they?
Yes, but what you see with Freyberg is a total absence of any kind of clarity of thought whatsoever. I mean, you just see someone who has been over promoted, who is so out of its depth, it's tragic, and so ill equipped to be leading on a battle of this scale and complexity, and it's it's an absolute tragedy. I mean, he is a very decent bloke. He's a good guy. If you met him at dinner, you'd have a great time with him, but is he fit to be a corps commander? Absolutely not. And the truth of the matter is when what you've got after the Abbey, this bastion of culture, high art, religion, one of the most famous buildings in Europe, has been completely destroyed for no reason whatsoever. It just lies there in rubble and ruins, having achieved absolutely nothing. And the proportion of 1,000-pound bombs is very, very small. The vast majority of the bombs that hit it are 500-pounders. So not 2,500-pounders, not 4,000-pounders, 500-pounders. And so all it does is just create a kind of pile of rubble rather than completely smash the German defences. And the number of Germans that are killed by this bombing is literally count them on 2 hands.
Yeah.
So it just achieves nothing. It's so badly planned, so badly executed. The blame it needs to be shared, of course. Alexander and Tuka and Clark are absolutely, ultimately it's their responsibility and they make the wrong call. Clark is against it, as you know, but Clark was all in favour of battering again against Monte Cassino. Alexander is in favour of battering against Monte Cassino and is in favour of supporting Freyberg's decision to bomb the Abbey. But they've got bigger things to think about.
So, Jim, what if at this point the Germans were to counterattack in Anzio?
Well, that's exactly what happens. Operation Fish Fang.
Oh, don't give away tomorrow's episode. Yes. Thanks everyone for listening. As you can see, James more than a bee in his bonnet about this. He has some very strident views, which have been fun to have aired. Like I said, thanks for listening. If you're enjoying this and you need to get to the next episode in a rush, subscribe to our Apple Podcasts channel or join our Patreon. We have ways of making you talk. You know how to use Google. You'll find us dead easy. Or come to our festival and you can grab Jim, buy him a pint and then get him to do this all to your face at We Have Ways Festival on the 18th to the 21st of July near Silverstone, just off the M40, very easy to get to, where historians and like-minded enthusiasts for the subject of the Second World War gather in a couple of fields and basically let it all hang out. That's the big idea of our festival. We look forward to seeing you there. In our next episode, what if the Germans counterattack? At Anzio. Thanks for listening and bye-bye.
Ciao.
Hi there. If you've just really enjoyed that episode of We Have Ways and want a bit more of Al Murray and his passion for history in your life, I have good news for you. I'm Emily Dean and I'm delighted to say that this week Al is a guest on my podcast, Walking the Dog, where you get to hear well-known faces at their most relaxed, because I talk to them over a leisurely outdoor stroll with my dog Raymond. So do join us this week for a very special in-depth chat with Al Murray, where he tells us the whole story behind the podcast and his love of history.
Because what we used to do before we did the podcast, if he was in town, he'd say, can we have lunch? I want to talk about Normandy or whatever.
Congratulations, it's been a good 40 minutes and you've not even mentioned 1944,
Well, no,
1939.
We've just got there.
If you want to hear more of my chat with Al, give Walking the Dog a listen this week. And while you're there, you can take your pick from episodes starring the likes of Ricky Gervais, Jack Whitehall and Jimmy Carr. So listen to Walking the Dog now, wherever you get your podcasts.